welcome everyone to our Caregiver series. Today we'll be on the topic of the conversation. I want to introduce our amazing speaker, Jane Barton. She is the author of Caregiving for the Genius. She's a passionate national speaker, writer, and listener. As the founder of Cardinal LLC, she provides educational programs, books, videos, podcasts, and blogs to assist people when confronting the daunting challenges posed by aging, caregiving, and the end of life. And without further ado, we'll hand it over to Jane Barton.
Thank you so much, Ginger. Let me share my screen, and away we will go with our conversation today. So, welcome everyone to another episode of the When You Care, a virtual caregiving educational series. And I'm certainly sending you a very warm welcome. Although we are not together physically, just know that I think this translates through cyberspace, that I'm very honored that you're here today and that I'm delighted to share a bit of the journey with you. And I certainly want to extend my heartfelt thanks to CSU Extension Services. And the staff that I've been able to work with over the last year has just been phenomenal. I love tag teaming with Ginger and Ellis, working with Allie, and then Sue Schneider was my original point of contact. So this is a delight for me because they afford us the opportunity to create a time, a space, and a place to come together and to talk about some important topics related not only to caregiving, but aging and living as well. So for those of you that may be new to me today, just a little thumbnail sketch as to why I do what I do. My name is obviously Jane Barton. My company is Cardinal, and I serve as an educational consultant, which means I get to do what I love every day. I serve as a speaker, a writer, and/or a listener, and I focus on the topics I'm passionate about: aging, end-of-life care, and caregiving. I have a background in hospice and palliative care, serving as a chaplain, as well as the director of education for a palliative care institute here in Denver for many years. Before that journey, I was in finance for a short period of time. And before that, I was a geologist in the oil patch. So go figure. A very curious career path indeed. But of greater relevance to what I do today is my personal story. I was called to care for my mom when I was 15. She was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. And that's proven to be the formative event of my life. I learned so much in caring for her for 8.5 years until she died. And I think my greatest learning is this: knowledge is power. And without it, life can be pretty darn scary. And so every time I speak, every time I write, I think of you, the audience, and what I can offer that will fill in some of the blanks, so that when you're challenged by life related to aging or caregiving or end of life, you can make an informed decision instead of merely reacting out of fear, because that never serves us well. And so that is certainly my mission today when we talk about the conversation, the chat we have with those who will be responsible for our care at the end of life. Now, this is a conversation probably unlike any other you will have. It can be frightening, it can be daunting, it can be eye-opening, it can be revelatory. But what it is, first and foremost, it is of greatest importance to make sure that at the end of your journey, your wishes will equal your reality related to your end-of-life care. So for our time together today, we're going to have these points of discussion. We're going to consider, why is the conversation so important? Then how do we script this ending? How do we imagine it to be when we're not clairvoyant? We don't know exactly what's going to happen as the journey continues to unfold. Then once we imagine that ending, how can we effectively initiate the conversation with our family and our friends, and also our doctors? And then once we have the conversation, how do we document our wishes in a manner that they have legal weight? They afford legal authority to those we are literally trusting with our life. And then finally, since I'll have you in the planning mode and thinking proactively about the end of your journey, I have a few issues beyond medical concerns that you might want to consider in the conversation as well. So we have a lot of ground to cover, but as Allie noted, if you have any questions or concerns, you can put them in the feature afforded by Zoom, or perhaps you can pose those verbally when we finish the prepared remarks for the program. So let's begin our discussion today with a question. Why is the conversation so important? Why am I going to push on this for probably an hour to encourage you to chat with the people in your life? Well, the reason it's important is because endings matter. The ending of your life certainly matters to you, but it also matters to the people that will be caring for you. And if we don't have the conversation, if we don't anticipate what could possibly happen and what we want to happen, then we're leaving it up to fate. And that can result in a very tragic ending far too often. Now, I'm not the only one concerned about this. Dr. Sunita Puri, who wrote the book That Good Night, relates a lot of stories of having cared for her patients at the end of life and some of the tragic endings that she witnessed. So she wrote her book. She said, "This is my attempt to inspire tough but necessary conversations in hopes of easing the suffering associated with the silence around mortality." And this is my hope as well. I hope through our discussion today, the presentation, that you will be prompted to contemplate your ultimate demise, that you will talk to your family and friends who will be caring for you. Now, I know this is countercultural, so I applaud you for being present today, to going there with me. But I hope that some of the questions I pose to you will be that little nudge to get you going, to think about the future, and then to gather people around to have this discussion because it's so needed in our country. Data shares with us that, hey, we're not doing a great job of discussing the end of life. AARP did a survey of their membership in 2021. And for those who responded to this survey, only 27% reported having the conversation with those who will be in charge of their care. So about a quarter of our population nationally. Now, back in 2018, the Conversation Project did their own survey. And for those who responded, 20% said they totally avoided the conversation because they didn't want to upset a loved one, a family member, or a friend. They thought if they talked about the reality of mortality, it would be emotionally distressing. But here's the bottom line. Without the conversation, the ending is not as we imagined. Our wishes will not equal our reality. And that's going to be painful for all concerned. It becomes a battle to hang on to our integrity and our sense of humanity. Atul Gawande describes it in this way in his phenomenal book, Being Mortal. The battle of being mortal is the battle to maintain the integrity of one's life, to avoid becoming so diminished or dissipated or subjugated that who you are becomes disconnected from who you were or who you want to be. Now, having worked in end-of-life care, serving as a hospice chaplain, having companioned my mom, my dad, and my brother to the conclusion of their journey, I can attest to the fact I've seen some very painful endings. And oftentimes it was the result of poor planning or an inability to contemplate the reality of mortality. So this is an important reminder today. The conversation, it's not all about you. The conversation is not all about me. Patients are not the only victims of bad deaths. Their families suffer as well because they witnessed that ending. And it's impactful. In fact, it can be life-changing. So I think it's up to each and every one of us to dig deep, to discover the strength and the courage to initiate this discussion. And once done, it's a priceless gift for your family, for everybody involved, because they won't be caught off guard and they won't be caught in a crisis wondering, I wonder what they wanted. We never talked about this. So it's time. It is time. Don't wait to initiate the conversation with your family as well as your doctors. Because guess what? Many clinicians don't want to go there either. They're not well trained to have the conversation, generally speaking. But it is time to gather all the pieces of your end of life plan, and you're probably going to need some clinical advice as well, talking about the possibilities of medical interventions with your doctors. Now, all of this said, we have to address the question of why is the conversation so seemingly scary? Well, I think it's rooted in our aversion to death. That is the societal cultural norm in the United States. We are scared to death of death. But I have to tell you, praying and trusting that all will be well, leaving it up to the fates, it is not adequate related to your end of life care and your end of life plans. We must take the reins. We must lean into life, assume the responsibilities for our own care and the care of our friends and our family members. And perhaps we will be more inclined to do this if we were to reframe the conversation, perhaps to pose a different question, to have a different perspective on this topic. Because I realize you're probably not going to get a positive response from your family if you say, hey, come on over Sunday afternoon. I want to talk about how I'm going to die. That's not going to be a real crowd pleaser. But what if we had a different perspective on it, a different take? What if we said, come over to my house on a Sunday afternoon. I want to paint you a picture of how I choose to live until the very last moment. I want to declare to you what makes life worth living for me, what matters the most to me, what are my priorities and my values. That is a very different feeling, and that leads to a very different discussion. Because when we're focused on death and dying because of our death aversion, we're frightened by the specter of death. And so we assume a fearful posture when we start to pull within and we become very protective. But if we focus on life and how we choose to live, we're motivated to declare what matters, what makes this day worthy of my time and attention and my effort. And inspired by a positive perspective, the half glass full perspective, we have a hopeful posture. We can lean into the discussion and lean into life. So I pose the question to you to see how it feels. How do you choose to live until the end of your road? What do you imagine? What do you envision? Well, in order to answer that question, it's going to take some time to reflect on your priorities and values and your wishes around end-of-life care. And then once done, that's when you start chatting. That's when you initiate the conversation with the people that will be involved in your plan of care. Now, the goal of the conversation when you gather folks together, it's how to be well and live well at every stage. Well-being is the ultimate goal. Now, I realize as we age and we are dealing with a significant diagnosis, yes, we're going to change physiologically, perhaps cognitively, but a sense of wholeness, an overall sense of well-being is still possible if we plan well. Now, every life results in a very unique narrative, a unique story. We all travel our own particular path, predicated on our priorities, our values, our goals, and our objectives. But we do share one commonality. As with all stories, the ending matters. It makes a significant difference to you as the person living your life and for the witnesses who see what unfolds with every step that you take. So it behooves us all to plan with the end in mind. So you're probably sitting there thinking, well, this all sounds well and good, but how do we get started? How do I get out of the blocks? Well, I just happen to have a few ideas for you. Begin within. Do the hard work of thinking about and feeling about what you imagine for the conclusion of your journey. Do that needed self-reflection. That's the first step. And as you ponder the future and as you consider the possibilities, you need to address the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how of your scenario. So let's touch on each one of these questions as you do that needed self-reflection. Who will be involved in this narrative that you are scripting? Who should be included in the conversation? Who do you trust to companion you to the end of the road, to be responsible for your care? Typically, we turn to family, but you may have friends that you perceive as family. So you do that mental inventory. Then you consider what? What is prompting you to consider the end of your life and maybe the need for the conversation? Is it this program? Is it a conversation you had with some beloved friends? Has someone in your family recently died? And so the reality of mortality is now front and center. Have you received a recent diagnosis? And so you realize that you're going to have some challenges in the days, weeks, and years to come. All of these things could be the spark that ignites your desire to start planning, to be more intentional about this. Now, when is your plan needed? Do you have a sense of urgency? I was actually talking to someone a few weeks ago, and they had recently been to their doctor. They'd had some issues, and they just wanted to get a checkup, only to discover they had a fairly urgent need for surgery. And so they were scheduling it a few weeks out. And in that interim period of time, this person was scrambling to get their affairs in order, part of which had to do with their medical preferences. So it may be a plan you need within the next few days or the next few weeks. Or maybe you don't have that rush to finalize this plan and you have a little bit of time. Just remember, this conversation is best done when you're not in the midst of a crisis, because that's when you're stressed, you're anxious, and your emotions are raw. So being proactive will serve you well. Now, where do you anticipate your final chapter unfolding? What is the setting? So just like any story that you would read, part of the narrative is where the story takes place. So would you be somewhere in Colorado? Would you be in your own home? Would you imagine concluding your journey perhaps in the home of one of your adult children? Or would you prefer to be in an acute care setting, perhaps in a hospital or a skilled nursing facility? It all depends on your preferences. And what about the why of your decision? What is driving the choices that you make? Maybe it's personal preferences. Maybe it's related to your religious or spiritual beliefs. But there's always a reason why you will choose one path over another. There's something pushing you in a particular direction. And that's important for you to recognize. And it's also something that your family can appreciate as well. They will understand why mom or dad or their beloved has chosen a particular medical intervention or not. A justification, if you choose to see it that way. And then the final question to consider is, after you've answered all of the previous questions, well then, how do you envision achieving this particular ending? Who needs to be involved? And what steps do you need to take to make sure you can enact upon it? So a lot of things to consider for sure. Now, with all of these questions, what guides us to the needed answers? Well, we've alluded to this previously, but obviously our values and priorities. We all have our own unique moral compass that guides us through life, directing us to what truly matters. So we consider those as our guardrails as we make some difficult choices. We also rely on our foundational beliefs and principles. That can be your religious tradition, your spiritual practice, maybe your personal morals and ethics. It's what you believe to be true and the standards that help you determine good from bad, right from wrong. These are what you're going to use when you're offered different plans of care and different medical options. These beliefs and principles will help you in your response. And certainly your short and long-term goals, they're going to shape and inform the choices that you make related to care at the end of life. And then we all have external forces that come to bear on the choices that we make. And sometimes these are the determining factors on what we choose to do. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, when I was serving as a chaplain in hospice, I had the privilege to companion a gentleman who came into our service. He had a terminal cancer. And one day when I visited him, he was sharing with me his experience over the past 2 years that brought him to hospice. And he was lamenting the fact that many of the medical interventions had caused him extreme suffering, the side effects of chemotherapy and radiation. And he willingly said to me, he said, I really regret in many ways having agreed to those treatments. But he said at the time it made the most sense. And I said, well, why was that? And he said, well, immediately after my diagnosis, my kids were just adamant that I would keep fighting. And I could tell based on their response to my diagnosis, they were not ready to say goodbye to me. So he said, I agreed to take the treatments, hoping I could buy a little bit more time and prepare my kids for my ultimate death. But he said, if it had just been me at diagnosis, he said, I wouldn't have done anything other than enjoy the time that I had. So he said, I am glad my kids are prepared for my death today, so it served a purpose. But it wouldn't have been his first choice if it had just been him. Now, I'm not saying his decision was right or wrong, but that was the why of his choice. He opted to pursue very aggressive medical interventions for the benefit of his children. And that is often the case. We make choices in light of those that we love, what we think is best for them. Now, as you ponder the questions, you're doing your self-reflection. You leverage all of these different elements that will lead you to answers. Having scripted your final chapter, now it's time to chat. It's time to share that story with the people that will be part of your journey, that will be part of your script. Now, having done a lot of hard work, you may be champing at the bit to chat. You're ready to go. You've finalized your plan. You feel good about it. And then when you dial up your family, well, maybe not so much. They're not as enthusiastic as you are. They haven't been doing this hard work, and maybe the subject is somewhat shocking to them. Now, that could be for your family or friends as well as your medical professionals that are helping to care for you. Just realize most people do not eagerly dive into the conversation. They would much prefer to avoid it or to delay it as long as possible. So instead, when you extend the invitation, you may hear the thundering hooves of people fleeing the room because they're not ready for this. They're not prepared for it. And they are being very culturally normal in being averse to the topic of death and dying. In fact, your family may even argue that, oh, it's not time. We don't need to talk about this yet. Dad, you're doing great. You may be 80 years old, but my gosh, you are functioning better than some 50-year-olds that I know. So again, procrastination. Or you may get a pushback that, okay, well, I'll come to the table and listen to you, but you can't make me talk. Body language screams resistance, right? Not an uncommon occurrence. So what entices people to gather around? How can you get people to listen to you and then to assist you at the end of life? Well, a few approaches might be beneficial to consider. First, telling people rarely works. You get a lot of resistance. So I encourage you to approach it as an invitation. invite the key people to the conversation, and then ask them for their help. Now, that means asking your family, your friends, and your doctors to listen to what you have in mind, and then to honor and support your request related to medical care. Say, I need your help. I can't do this by myself. Now, I find that most people find it very hard to resist and ask. And this is a heartfelt, very compassionate request. And so sometimes that kind of wears away at their defenses and they're more willing to listen to you. And if you create a cozy and a safe environment, an intentional time to have this discussion, that serves the overall good as well. So you're not going to spring this topic on someone as you're cruising through the mall on a Saturday. You are going to invite people to a future gathering a week or a few weeks down the road so they can mentally and emotionally prepare. Perhaps having it in your home, gathering around the kitchen table, having coffee or hot tea and maybe some fresh scones. But you want it to be an inviting environment so people feel comfortable to talk about a very difficult subject. Now, even with all that said, you have to have realistic expectations. There will be some resistance, and there's going to be a lot of fear. So acknowledge their trepidation. Recognize that this is a frightening topic and normalize that. Also acknowledge that family and cultural norms related to the end-of-life issues may be counter to what you're doing that day. So if historically your family has never talked about the end of life, well, why are you doing it now? Why are you changing it? We don't like change as human beings. So name the elephant in the room. Say, I know we typically don't do this in our family. And guess what? It hasn't served us well. So maybe it's time we change the tradition and we start today. And will you join me in this? Also, be aware of the different personalities at the table. Again, this is having realistic expectations. There are going to be some people in your community, they're ready to chat with you. They're going to lean into this conversation and support you. There are going to be others that are just going to be big-eyed and totally shocked and awed. And there are others that are going to be resistant. So work with what you have at the table. Leverage the strengths, mitigate the weaknesses, and see if you can get everybody on the same page. And certainly approach it by reframing the conversation so you don't scare people to death. So you start by saying, this is how I choose to live, and I need you to support me in this. Just that one phrase can change the entire tenor of the conversation. Now, once the conversation is going, encourage questions. People may need to clarify something that you've stated, or maybe they have a different idea and they pose a different question you've never pondered before. So when questions come up and the conversation unfolds, listen well, and again, observe body language. Because oftentimes what people are saying does not align with what their body is telling you. So make sure it correlates well. So you can lead by example. As you're sitting around the table and you're looking at your family, the people that you trust, you need to be calm, cool, and collected because they're going to pick up on your energy. So be well prepared for this discussion. And that will lead to a very, I think, beneficial, constructive start to a conversation that will ultimately be ongoing. It's not just one time, because things are going to continue to change as you age, and you're going to tweak your plan. You may change your mind, and you have the right to do so. Now, thus far, when I've been talking about the conversation, it's been from your perspective, all related to your experience and your conclusion to this journey of life. But you can apply everything we're talking about today in a different manner. If you are caring for someone or you're concerned about another person, say an aging parent or an aging spouse, you can use everything we're talking about to start the conversation with them. You just have a different role in the proposition. And you can approach it by saying, I want to support you from start to finish, but I need to know what you want. I need to know what your wishes are. Would you be willing to tell me? So know that we can use all of this information in a myriad of ways. Now I want to share some resources with you. They're all free of charge and they are available online that will give you some ideas on how to have this conversation and give you some specifics. So I like you to have tools when you leave the end of this program. So I want to share with you some very well vetted resources that are available to you and your family. The first is afforded to you by the Conversation Project, and this is the homepage. And all of these websites are included in the bibliography of your handout for this program. So you don't have to furiously write these down. But the Conversation Project has been around for years, and they offer what they call a conversation guide for families. You can download this in a PDF file format, and then at your leisure, you can work through this particular brochure. And basically, it walks you through 4 steps, very similar to what we just discussed. It will encourage you in step 1 to do your self-reflection. In step 2, to plan your talk, to create a time and a space for the discussion. Step 3 is how do you kickstart the conversation? They even give you examples of questions or statements to make that would be inviting. And then finally, in step 4, they remind you to keep talking, that this is an ongoing conversation that will evolve as your journey changes. Now, there's another fabulous resource that is offered by Compassion and Choices. This is an organization that advocates for choice at the end of life related to medical care. And they have a brochure entitled My End of Life Decisions. Again, you can download free of charge in a PDF file. Now, this particular document goes into extensive explanation of advanced care planning, advanced directives, and they provide advanced planning toolkits. And this basically focuses on once you identify how you want your journey to end, this is how you document your wishes. Again, a phenomenal resource that you can share with your family and friends. Now, when you have your conversation, I highly recommend that when you have people gathered around the table, you encourage everyone to pull out their smartphone and hit the record button and record your conversation. Because guess what? Our memories are not perfect. And let's say 6 months down the line or 2 years down the road, you don't recall everything that was said that day. Well, if you have this recording on your phone, you can replay it and refresh your memory. So this is a good way to document the conversation that you have. And remember, it's not just one time you'll record a conversation. This is going to be a series of conversations. Now, once you have the conversation, which is vitally important, now it's time to document your wishes. And I'm going to run through some of the documents that will serve you well and will afford the legal authority to those who are helping you at the end of life. Now, where do you get these forms? I get this question all the time when I do training on advanced directives. There's a wonderful resource, caringinfo.org, and it offers state-specific forms that are recognized as the form for the state. This is offered by the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. So you can download those blank forms and then fill them in. And this will help you to complete your advanced directives. Now, this is a confusing term in general for the population because some people think it's just one document. but actually it's a compilation of documents that will designate your healthcare agent, the person that will serve as your surrogate decision maker. It will document your healthcare instructions, what you want and what you will refuse at the end of life. It documents all your other wishes related to the ending of your journey, and it serves as a catalyst for communication. So what are the documentation options? What can you include in that packet of documents? Well, we're going to chat about 6 different choices that you might want to include. Personally, my opinion is if you only have one document, have the medical durable power of attorney. You need that person who is going to speak for you when you can't. We're also going to look at the living will, a CPR directive, dementia directive, 5 wishes, and then MOST, which stands for medical order for scope of treatment. So we're just going to touch on these, and then if you have any additional questions, we can address those in the Q&A. So a medical durable power of attorney is a legal document that designates the person that will speak for you. Now, don't surprise someone by designating them as your healthcare agent. You need to ask them if they're willing to do this. This is not an easy role to assume. It can be incredibly emotional, but this is a person you are trusting to stand up for your preferences and your wishes related to medical care. You can designate a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary on most of these forms. Then there is the living will. Now, oftentimes, if you are working with a lawyer to craft your last will and testament, they will bring up the option of including a living will in that packet for an additional $75, whatever it might be. Basically, the function of a living will is that if you have a terminal illness and 2 doctors agree that it is terminal, if you are unable to communicate your preferences or you are in a persistent vegetative state, this document comes into force and it states what you prefer and what you will refuse related to life-sustaining treatment, such as a ventilator, perhaps a feeding tube, or CPR. So it's a very narrow document in its scope, and it's not adequate in and of itself. Because realize you may not succumb to a terminal disease process. You may die of complications associated with a chronic condition. And if that's the case, this document will never come into effect. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have one, but it's not enough if that's the only thing you have. Another document you may consider having is what is referred to as a CPR directive. And this is a form that you fill out with your doctor that states you do not want to be resuscitated. This is important to have posted in your home because let's say you had a medical emergency and someone in your family calls 911. When the ambulance arrives and the medical professionals come in, they will go to the front of your refrigerator to see if you have a CPR directive posted. If it's not, and you need resuscitation by law, they must do so, even if you've told your family you don't want to be resuscitated. So if you want to make sure your wishes are honored in your home, talk to your doctor about crafting a CPR directive and then post it on your refrigerator. That's the typical spot. But if you want to make sure you post it in the right place, call the closest firehouse to your residence and ask them where they will look if called into your home. The dementia directive is something that many people today are desiring to include in their advanced directives because the increased incidence of Alzheimer's in our country. You can find this form on dementia-directive.org. And basically you walk through the form and you check your preferences related to medical care predicated on the stage of dementia you may be in, early, middle, or late stage. This affords people some comfort and a sense of peace that the family and also medical professionals will understand how aggressive you want to be in your medical care as cognitive impairment progresses. 5 Wishes is a booklet that has been around for decades. I think it's now recognized as a legal document in 49 of the 50 states, if I'm correct. It tells you which states actually honor this form on the second page. But it's very popular because it kind of covers all the bases in one booklet. It's inexpensive. If you go online and order a hard copy of it, I believe it's now $5. But sometimes a local hospice may be handing these out free of charge. So you can call around and see if anybody has some available. You can also go to the website for 5 Wishes and create an online account. You fill out a form online, and then you can save it in a PDF format as well. But basically, the 5 wishes include wish number 1, which serves as your medical durable power of attorney, designating your healthcare agent. The second wish, you can articulate what you want and what you would refuse as far as medical care at the end of life. Wishes 3 and 4 are the comfort wishes, where you want to be, who do you want by your bedside, do you want flowers in the room or music playing? You can be as verbose as you choose to be on wishes 3 and 4. And then wish 5 is how you choose to be remembered. So you can have preferences stated as far as burial versus cremation, funeral versus memorial service, or a celebration of life. Again, you can be as detailed or as general as you choose to. And then the final form, it's actually not considered part of an advance directive. It's a doctor's order. So this form actually becomes part of your medical chart. And it's been available for the last 15 years, I think. And it serves a purpose for individuals that are suffering from the frailties of getting older or who have a serious disease process. And in either situation, the person is transitioning oftentimes from residence to an emergency room periodically because an exacerbation of a symptom or maybe uncontrollable pain. And so this particular order is designed to ensure the continuum of care and the honoring of preferences. And it's related to, again, extraordinary measures at the end of life, as far as CPR, the administration of antibiotics, as well as mechanical ventilation. So you can check your preferences on that. And it typically requires a recording of those preferences on a particular color of paper and a certain weight of paper. And it's usually a neon color that kind of jumps off the page so doctors don't have to flip through the entire chart to find it. So if you don't have a most form, but you're basically healthy, you don't need one. But this is just in the latter stages of life if you're compromised significantly by aging or a disease process. Now, some other things to consider in planning for the ending of your journey. If you want to be an organ or tissue donor, you might want to talk to an organization such as Donor Alliance to understand what documentation you need to fill out before the time arrives. Also, prepare your family for this. Let them know if you're choosing to be a donor so they can anticipate that. That's also true with whole body donation. If you want to donate your body to science, whether it's a medical school or a dental school, you might check out sciencecare.com to understand the process that you would go through. And if you have a particular school that you want to donate to, contact that medical or dental school to make sure they're accepting donations, because some are not. And I would also encourage you to include a letter to the people that you're leaving behind, a letter to the people that are caring for you that basically states your philosophy of life, because you can't anticipate everything that might happen in the future. And so if you write a letter stating what a good day looks like for you, what makes life worth living, then in the midst of a moment never imagined, they have some guardrails on what choice to make for you, even though you haven't had that specific discussion. and it can give them tremendous comfort that they did what was best for you. Now, to tag on to our discussion, since hopefully I have you in this planning mode, what other important topics might you include in the conversation with your family so that you have a good ending for all concerned? Well, certainly a last will and testament. If you're having the conversation to get everything in line related to your medical care, well, let's make sure you have everything financially organized as well. The settlement of your estate, and then designating a financial power of attorney so they can manage your finances. Now, you may want to work with an elder law attorney to do all of this. This is a specialty within the legal profession, and elder law attorneys can serve you incredibly well. And if you're unfamiliar with this specialty, you can check out the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Go to the website. You can search by, I think, large metropolitan areas or maybe even your zip code. Click on Find a Lawyer. You can see who actually practices as an elder law attorney. And most will afford you 30 minutes or an hour of free consultation. You can see if it's a good fit. See if you want to work with this person. Now, if you choose any kind of lawyer to help you with finalizing your estate and getting your last will and testament together, pass that contact information along to your family who is caring for you, so they don't have to flip through your files and try to figure out who to contact when the time comes to settle your estate. Now, ask yourself this question. When you designate a power of attorney to handle your finances, when you designate someone to be the executor of your will, are they going to know which way to go after you die to find all the important documents? Well, in all likelihood, the answer is going to be no. And that's even true if you live with the person. But if you're asking a friend to come in and settle your estate, they are really going to be frustrated by the scavenger hunt they are now on. So I recommend that you do them the greatest favor of all and create a file, a one-stop shop, where you have all of your documents, all your important papers in one place. Now, I know that takes some time and effort on your part, but again, this is a great gift for those who are helping you out. And you may even want to draw a treasure map if you want to look at it in this way. I did this for my friends who have agreed to care for me at the end of my life and to settle my estate after my death, because I'm the last one standing in my biological family. I'm not married and I don't have any children. So this is a big ask for my friends. And as I contemplated how that would unfold, I realized they have no idea where I keep my banking records. Do they know how to find my logins and my passwords for all my digital accounts? Do they even know how to get into my house? Do they have a key? So we had a wonderful conversation one evening, and I figured out exactly all the documents they would need. And I put together a map of my home, where to find everything, and I have an outline for them. It's still going to require a lot of effort on their part, but they're going to be off to a good start. And I feel good about that. We also have to think about all of our baggage that we're leaving behind after our death. Now, this is so true for my generation, the boomers. We love our stuff, don't we? And we have collected a lot over the course of a lifetime. Hence, all of the storage facilities scattered from the east to the west coast, right? So, when you go into your basement, you crawl up into your attic, glance out into the garage, you have to wonder, who gets what after I'm gone? And an even more important question is, does anyone want my stuff? I've been talking to some dear friends of mine. We're all of a similar age. And so we're all thinking about downsizing, maybe transitioning into a smaller home, and stuff is a big issue. Now, my friends have kids and they have grandkids, and they've related to me these funny conversations with their children Their kids don't want any of it. They're like these little minimalists. They don't want the family china. They don't want the huge hutch. They don't want the antique furniture. They're absolutely fine not having any of it. And that's their choice. But now my friends, and me included, now we're searching for organizations that could benefit from a donation. And there are many out there, but it still takes some time and a lot of effort to find the right organization that will take some of the stuff that you have. So planning ahead, vitally important. Now, if you're overwhelmed by all of this, guess what? There are some professionals that do this for a living, and they're phenomenally good. I encourage you to check out Senior Move Managers. There is actually a national association of senior and specialty move managers out there. You can go out to their website. Again, you can discover who in your community serves in this capacity, but they can help you with downsizing and the ultimate move to a different location. I have several clients and many friends that have utilized this service over the last 10 years. They said it saved some relationships in their family, so it was well worth the cost. Now, we also need to plan for the transition for our furry family members, our beloved pets. So as you are planning ahead and you're thinking, wow, when I'm gone, who's going to take care of my dogs or my cat or my bunny or my ferret, whatever you choose to love? Well, that's an important question. And sometimes people actually include this in their last will and testament, even allocating funds to help in paying for the cost of care. So talk to your family, talk to your friends, and make sure you have that transition mapped out. And that will give you a tremendous peace of mind. And the last thing I want to touch on are your final arrangements. Now, I have a whole program in which we talk about the importance of end-of-life ritual. So have you thought about it? And do you have any specific instructions? Do you prefer to be buried? Are you leaning toward cremation? Do you already have a funeral plot? Do you have a place you'd like to be scattered? And have you told anybody this? Who will orchestrate your service? Do they know whether you want a funeral or a memorial service or a celebration of life, open to whomever, or is it just for close family and friends? And if you've prepaid for a funeral, does your family know that you've done this? If so, let them know where the documentation is, which funeral home you've worked with, and that will save them a lot of angst in the heat of the moment. Now, I know there's a lot to consider. We've covered a lot of bases related to the conversation, but I didn't intend to scare you. Today, I'm trying to motivate you, to urge you to do this in a time when you're not in crisis, when the urgency is lower. And so you're clear-headed, you're clear-minded, and you can have that conversation in a very beneficial and constructive way. But my job today is to ask that question. Are you ready for the end of your journey? And if not, it's time to get moving. And you don't have to do it all in one day. Take one step at a time. Consider one question, perhaps, each day. This isn't going to happen in short order. This is a process. And once you start it, remember it's going to be iterative, ever-changing and transforming as your situation changes. But I trust you can do this. And as you take those steps, you're creating the priceless gifts for you and your family, identifying what matters to you, initiating the conversation that's so vitally important, and you get organized. And getting your ducks in a row, it's a good thing indeed for you and your family. Now, I always do a little closing ritual. I seemingly have one more thing to say every time I present. And today it's pretty short and sweet because 2 words summarize what I want to convey to you today. And those 2 words are endings matter. They matter tremendously. So be intentional, be attentive, and be proactive. in envisioning your ending and sharing that image and your desires to those who will be responsible for your care. It will serve all concerned in amazing and wondrous ways. Now, a few resources that you can tap into as time permits. If you're interested in other programs that I may be offering in the next 3 or 4 months, you can check out cardinallife.com. Click on the events tab. All the programs I offer are free of charge. 99% are online at this point, and many are recorded. So I would love to see you at another event. If you're looking for a resource around caregiving, I wrote a book, Caregiving for the Genius, a few years ago, and it talks about the experience of giving and receiving care, what it feels like. I also have a podcast, Cardinal Musings with Jane Barton, in which I talk about what matters most in life, a variety of topics related to aging, end-of-life care, as well as caregiving. And I hope you will save the date for our next episode of When You Care, Collaborative Care, Working and Caring Together. That will be November 15th, 11:30 to 1 o'clock. Same time, same place. So I want to thank you for your time and attention today and sharing a bit of the journey with me. Know that I'm sending many blessings to you and yours. And if I can ever be of help to you, don't hesitate to drop me an email at cardinallife@msn.com. I have a lot of connections in the community. If I can't answer your question, I probably know someone who can. I'm happy to be that conduit for information. So now it's time for questions, concerns, or maybe some stories if you care to share. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back to my cohorts in crime.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was so wonderful. I know in my experience, these are really hard conversations. I've worked with a lot of families through this, and I think you provide a really great way to have these conversations and not let them be so scary. They are scary, but there are tools and resources to be able to help families have these conversations. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll leave it open to questions. I didn't get any in the Q&A during your presentation, but I'm open to any questions you guys have for Jane. Oh, here we go. Do you have any advice for initiating the conversation with a parent who keeps brushing you off?
This happens a lot, and it actually happened in my own family. My brother and I were brushed off by our father for a considerable amount of time toward the end of his life, and it did not serve any of us well. So I'm really passionate about this particular situation. Again, I think if you go in asking and inviting the conversation, sometimes that can disarm that resistance. But I think before you can do that, you have to understand where that reluctance is coming from. Now, it could be related to your parents' fear around their own death or the process of dying. Now, if that's what it relates to, that might be a situation where talking to a doctor to understand the prognosis, if they have a disease process ongoing, that could be helpful just to assure them they're going to have the help they need at the end of their life. Sometimes resistance comes between a parent and a child because they feel as if their kids are trying to tell them what to do, and they're not willing to give up that role as a parent. I'm the father, I'm the mother. You can't tell me, what to do. And it's an issue of control. And if you look at some of the research, some of the greatest fears we have as we age is the loss of independence and loss of control. And so as we get older and we realize we're failing physically or cognitively, we can't control that. Then we start to control the things we can, and we can become obsessive about it. So perhaps your parent may not be able to control some things in their life, but they can control the conversation they have with you. It just depends on the relationship that you have. But if you express a sincere desire to help them as they age and to be with them and to support their preferences, if you say, hey, I just need to know how I can help you the most as this journey continues, as you get older. And I don't want to be stuck somewhere wondering if this is what you want. That would be so hard for me. So help me do this well. Help me to care for you. And if you speak from your heart, and if you have a good relationship with your parent, they're going to pick up on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jane. Let's see, we've got another question coming in. If you have siblings, do you think it's important to have the conversation all together with your parents, or is it okay to initiate it individually?
That relates, I think, to the nature of your family system and how you've typically related to each other historically. Some families come together and they work together well. Sometimes it's more segmented. So I would look at historical patterns. But if you meet separately, realize you're not all hearing the same thing at the same time, stated in the same way. So your understanding could be very different. If you were to meet separately, again, I would strongly recommend that you record that conversation and then share it with your other siblings that might not have been able to attend that meeting. And then they can say, oh, wow, Dad didn't mention that when I talked to him. So you can start to kind of share that information so that everybody can have a consensus of understanding.
Correct. Thank you so much, Jane. I have a comment and question for you too. In my experience, there's a lot of family dynamics at the end of life, and there can be some confusion around CPR directives in most forms and when people can change them or when they cannot change them. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Are you referring to like capacity or competence?
Capacity and competence and maybe honoring choices when that person's not able to choose any longer.
There can be, there's a lot of distress in some family systems at the end of life, particularly if you never had the conversation. Then everybody's coming to the table with their own preferences and their own wishes based on their own values and opinions. I've seen families totally blown apart at the end of life because everybody's kind of doing battle and they think their choice or their preference around medical care is the right one. So I do a whole presentation on what I call the final chapter, looking at what is available around medical interventions at the end of life. And I try to stress there is no one right answer in medical care. It depends on what you value, what constitutes a quality of life, and we all have the ability to self-determine, to choose our own way. But in order to make that choice, we must have the cognitive capacity to be deemed to be competent to make that decision. That's why doing this ahead of time before the medical crisis is so vitally important. And then it has legal authority. And you then need to designate your healthcare agent that will support your wishes, the preferences that you've documented. Now, that doesn't mean it avoids discussion, debates, or arguments at the end of life, because some family members may come late into the scenario to learn that their parents said, no to mechanical ventilation, not doing that, or no to antibiotics for a pneumonia. I'm 95 years old, I'm not doing this. And then the children end up going, oh my gosh, we could do something, and our parents refusing it. That's wrong. And then people start to have a turf war. It's not about wrong or right at that point. It's about honoring the preferences of the person. It's their journey. How can we support them? So there's no easy answer to the question, Ginger. I mean, this is difficult even when you have a plan in place, because it's hard to say goodbye. It's hard to recognize that someone you've cared for and known the entirety of your life will not be of this world in short order. And goodbyes are difficult.
Absolutely. And like you said, all the more reason to have these conversations ahead of time and uphold those relationships through the end as well, too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have time for one or two more questions if we have any. While we wait for those, I just want to let everybody know we do have a survey link posted in the chat. We would love your feedback on our webinars. This will go to Jane and our team here at CSU Extension. We use this data to support our ongoing work as we receive funding from the USDA in order to provide free and low-cost services to Coloradans across the state. Okay, it looks like that might be it for questions today. I want to thank everybody for coming, and we hope to see you next month for collaborative care. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.